There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Welcome to the serious TV drama podcast, Twilight Zone Edition. I'm your host, Scott, and joining me for yet another step through a doorway to a world of infinite possibilities, we welcome back Brian. Good to have you back, Brian.
It's good to be back, Scott. We have a couple of good episodes, and I look forward to discussing them with you.
As do I, because, on tonight's podcast, we will be focusing on those two more Twilight Zone episodes, A World of Difference and Long Live Walter Jameson, which are, respectively, the 23rd and 24th episodes from that first season that were originally released way back in mid-March of 1960. So, let's get started with a trip around the world to A World of Difference. Now, this is the first of 4 episodes that was directed by Ted Post, although we won't be getting to the other 3 for quite some time, as they are all from the 5th and final season of The Twilight Zone. Now, Ted Post was a Brooklyn boy. He even worked as an usher at the Loews Pitkin Theater in Brownsville back in the late 1930s. Now, that was decades before that neighborhood went pretty much downhill, and the theater closed in the early 70s. Oh, incidentally, the last films shown in that theater were 1971's Shaft and a re-release of a Jim Brown film called The Split. I didn't know Jim Brown had starred in several movies after A Dirty Dozen, but I'm about to go off on a tangent here, so let me get back to Mr. Post. He did soon find his way to the director's chair himself. He first did summer stock theater productions, and after his time that he served with the Army in World War II, he was one of the many who made their bones and then some in television. He helmed episodes of many well-known TV westerns such as The Rifleman, Wagon Train, 24 episodes of Rawhide, and 55 episodes of Gunsmoke. He directed several other things as well, including 179 episodes of Peyton Place and a couple Perry Mason episodes too. But I wonder if his work on the aforementioned Rawhide, which of course starred Clint Eastwood, actually led to his first truly major motion picture directing job. And I am skipping over a fairly minor and inconsequential one that he did in the mid-50s. But the big job he got was on 1968's Hang 'em High, a Clint Eastwood Western, which, if I'm not mistaken, was also the first American Western that headlined Clint Eastwood on the heels of his spaghetti Western trilogy. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's the first American film, period, that had Clint Eastwood as the main star. Now, Ted Post would work with Eastwood again on the second Dirty Harry film, as he directed Magnum Force. A few other noteworthy directing efforts from Post included the second Planet of the Apes film, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the original TV movie / pilot for Cagney and Lacey, and, you know what? Looking over a CV here, I will end his bio by going to my go-to, as I always do, for he did direct 2 episodes of Columbo. 1975's A Case of Immunity with Hector Elizondo and Sal Mineo, which honestly is not one of the better or more memorable Columbo episodes in my opinion. And he also directed 1976's A Matter of Honor with Ricardo Montalban, which really isn't much better than the other one, to be honest. So, let's get back to this episode of Twilight Zone, which was written by Richard Matheson, who, other than Mr. Sterling himself, has likely been the most talked about person connected to the Twilight Zone on this podcast. Mostly due to me, because I guess I've talked about him the most on STVD episode 434, which featured coverage of the episode And When the Sky Was Open. So if you want to hear me talk a lot more about Richard Matheson, I would go to that podcast. But suffice to say here, Matheson wrote 14 episodes and provided the original short story for 2 others that they were based upon, which made him the 3rd most utilized writer in the Twilight Zone universe after Rod Serling and Charles Beaumont, whom we'll be checking in with later on in this podcast. Matheson also wrote the fun episode that ends season 1, A World of His Own, as well as the 2 iconic Shatner starring episodes, Nick of Time and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, among others. So let's get to the cast. Howard Duff plays our main character, Arthur Curtis, or is he Jerry Reagan? Rugged and always a man's man, Duff hailed from the Pacific Northwest. He found acting to be an agreeable option after he was cut from his high school basketball team. His acting chops may have paved the way for his military service to be redirected to the radio service of the U.S. Air Force. He was even the announcer for the radio drama Suspense in 1943. Years later, his biggest radio role was that of playing Sam Spade in the ongoing continuing series on radio, The Adventures of Sam Spade. However, between accusations of being a communist coinciding with his on-screen career, pretty much poised to take off in both TV and film, he left that series. Oh, he was married to Ida Lupino around this time. Ida Lupino, who we might remember being talked about on this podcast when we covered 16 Millimeter Shrine. But his relationship with Ida Lupino was interesting because it also followed a rather rough and tumble relationship that he had with the fiery Ava Gardner. I'm just going through all this. He did co-star with Ida Lupino in actually 5 films, both before and during their marriage. They were separated in 1966, but they didn't officially divorce until 1984. So, Hollywood. Duff had a decent run of feature films, including a number of westerns and other genre-based picks. And although he would still snag the occasional little supporting role in later films, even something like No Way Out with Kevin Costner and Gene Hackman, his work for decades was primarily on television. Hey, including a number of episodes of both Dallas and Knots Landing. He passed away from a heart attack in 1990 at the age of 76. Now, who else do we have in this one? Well, on the recognizability chart, the next person would be David White, who plays Brinkley, Jerry Reagan's increasingly frustrated agent. While the true cinephiles among us will recognize David White from his memorable supporting parts in film classics like Sweet Smell of Success and The Apartment, odds are most are going to recognize him more from playing Larry Tate on over 190 episodes of Bewitched. Beyond Bewitched, it's really hard to find a reasonably well-known drama or sitcom that White didn't appear in throughout the 70s and 80s. You name it, from the Rockford Files to Rhoda, from The Odd Couple to Quincy. Why not? Hey, you know what? He even shows up on all of the 1970s superhero TV shows. That means he was on Wonder Woman, The Incredible Hulk, and he was J. Jonah Jameson on the old Spider-Man TV show as well. There are dozens and dozens of other TV shows one could cite. Hey, once again, including both Dallas and Dynasty. I will wrap up his career bio by pointing out he's actually, unlike the director we talked about earlier and what he had done, this man is actually in a great episode of Columbo. Because, I got to mention the Columbos. That would be 1975's Identity Crisis. That's the one with Patrick McGowan and Leslie Nielsen. I believe... if I'm remembering correctly, I think David White plays a representative from the government. This has to do with all the spy stuff that Columbo is starting to get involved in because of McGowan and such. Such a good episode. Guys should go see it. It really is. And guess what? He will also show up on The Twilight Zone one more time. He will show up in season 3's I Sing the Body Electric. Guess what? He also dies of a heart attack in 1990, just like Howard Duff, except he was at the age of 74. Let me see. Who else is worthy of mention here? Well, there's Frank Maxwell, who appears here as the director, Marty Fisher, often playing no-nonsense authority figures, be they film directors, military officers, or simply officers of the law. I'm actually surprised this is this man's only Twilight Zone appearance, because he shows up like 5 times on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And although he was probably better known for his dramatic work, that didn't stop Maxwell from appearing on so many sitcoms. Everything like Hogan's Heroes and The Munsters and Gomer Pyle and Gilligan's Island. Hey, look, he's also in an episode of Bewitched. But I tend to think of him more dramatically, like those aforementioned Hitchcock episodes or The Outer Limits or a number of Perry Mason episodes. But I will close out his career bio here by citing the fact he was on, 2 episodes of Rockford, 4 episodes of Quincy. Always got a soft spot for anything with Jack Klugman, and which is very Twilight Zone to begin with. And good Lord, he was on 504 episodes of the General Hospital. What? Anyway, I think at this point I am going to move on to the actual episode. And as we start, as almost always, I will start with the opening narration from Mr. Rod Serling. You're looking at a tableau of reality. Things of substance, of physical material, a desk, a window, a light. These things exist and have dimension. Now, this is Arthur Curtis, age 36, who is also real. He has flesh and blood, muscle and mind. But in just a moment, we will see how thin a line separates that which we assume to be real with that manufactured inside of a mind. Now, as Mr. Serling describes, we follow this businessman, this Arthur Curtis, past his friendly interaction with his secretary, talking about plane tickets and his impending vacation with his wife, Marion, into his modern office, complete with those fashionable of the day Japanese sliding doors and such. But when he goes to make a phone call, he finds that the phone is dead. And his initial confusion is multiplied by 1,000 when he hears someone off screen yell, "Cut!" And he turns to see that one side, one wall of his office isn't there. And in fact, the entire place is a set on a soundstage with dozens of people looking on, technicians at work, a director getting impatient with the antics of his main star, who is the name of who's supposed to be portraying Arthur Curtis, Jerry Regan. The problem is Jerry, or Arthur, doesn't believe that he's an actor who's only gotten so many chances after his bouts of alcoholism, a man who's in the midst of a rather nasty divorce from his less than sympathetic ex-wife, Nora, and we, either the studio and their executives, think he's faking his own mental deterioration or not. Either way, as he finds out from his agent later, when he ends up at the Reagan home, this really is his last chance. But he still contends he's Arthur Curtis, despite not being able to find his supposed address, despite finding no phone listing for his company that he works at, despite everything and everyone telling him otherwise, even after seeing the actual shooting script for The Private Life of Arthur Curtis, and then learning that the film has been shut down, canceled on account of his behavior and apparent breakdown. He still insists that he's the actual Arthur Curtis. As he makes off with his agent's car, Jerry/Arthur, however you want to call him, hightails it back to the movie set, as being in the process of being broken down. He's hoping, he's praying, demanding and begging not to be left in this clearly miserable world of Jerry Regan. And that's when we see his office looks as it did before. We see his secretary Sally is there with those plane tickets he had mentioned earlier. And there's his wife Marion too, a desperate embrace later. And they're bolting out of the office, presumably off to the airport, and boarding a jet further into the life of Arthur Curtis. But then we also see the set being further broken down as Reagan's agent Brinkley, he shows up, he's there, and it becomes clear that Reagan has vanished. The script for The Private World of Arthur Curtis sits atop a cluttered desk as we then see a plane taking off, presumably that plane with the passengers Arthur and Marion Curtis. And then we hear from Mr. Serling again. The modus operandi for the departure from life is usually a pine box of such and such dimensions, and this is the ultimate in reality. But there are other ways for a man to exit from life. Take the case of Arthur Curtis, age 36. His departure was along a highway with an exit sign that reads, "This way to escape." Arthur Curtis, en route to the Twilight Zone. Now, this is an episode that I feel requires perhaps a bit more thought and contemplation than many of the other episodes that we've seen so far this initial season of the show. I feel it raises questions throughout. I mean, first, which is it? Is this man Jerry Regan, or is he Arthur Curtis, excuse me. made an unintentional WKRP reference. I hope I didn't do that throughout the earlier part. If I did, I apologize. I'm pretty sure I hope I did. Is this an exploration of an alternate reality, or is it of mental illness? And with all that, what does the ending really mean? Yes, it's another example of a main character choosing, or, well, should we even say to live as the verb here, or rather to exist in another plane of existence? It's much like Il Lupino in the 16 millimeter shrine that I mentioned earlier. But is this actually analogous to death? As if Jerry Reagan being erased from reality, well, which means he's being erased from existence. Doesn't that therefore mean he meets his end, that he dies? Um, you know, me being a Matheson fan, I wouldn't necessarily have cited this episode among the more memorable ones if you had asked me anytime before my rewatch of it in this last week or so. But now getting the chance to really examine it a lot more closely than I had before, um, I kind of think there's really something kind of admirable. It's both light and downright eerie about this entire story. And I think it's those questions I just mentioned and the ambiguity that really makes it that much a better episode than I might have initially thought, if that makes any sense, Brian.
Sure. No, I thought something that I picked up on this episode watching it. We've talked a little bit about this before, but with the black and white filmmaking of the episodes, lighting is a big issue, throughout the show. But I noticed this was another like brightly lit episode. Like they're on a lighted set. And then, when he leaves to go looking for his house, it's a sunny day. It's not the evening. I thought that was a kind of a contrast to his mental state being very impaired, but also a different look than the show usually had. And I guess my final thoughts are it is shocking to see the little girl get grabbed by him. Like that's something I think they would be much more careful with today. It's a little shocking to see that, which gives probably a sort of a jump scare there to people watching. And I guess, Scott, I'm curious what you think about this. Thought I had watching this was this some sort of commentary on the trend of method acting becoming popularized in film actors during the, decade before where it started to really gain popularity?
That's entirely possible. I mean, Matheson and his sense of humor, that would kind of go hand in hand with it. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I think it could conceivably fall into that kind of category. One interesting thing I want to bring up now before I forget, because I did a lot of digging on this. Speaking of something maybe on a more technical side for the episode, because we talked about, as you were mentioning, the lighting, something I feel that needs to be mentioned and specifically and strongly about the episode is the opening. And by opening, I mean the opening shot, which leads up to and includes the reveal that the office is, in fact, a movie set. I will refer right now to these comments and quotes that I came across on a really excellent blog that covered the Twilight Zone that's called Shadow and Substance. You can find that on social media outlets like Twitter and Facebook, and so on. Now, I mean, because when I was watching the episode initially, before I rewatched parts of it, it grabbed me because there were certainly more straightforward and conventional ways they could have accomplished that shot. But let's just listen to Ted Post, the director himself, talk about it. I'll quote him here. He says, "I wanted to do this in one shot. I want Howard Duff first shot as he comes into the office. Gail Kobe is the secretary. He asks for any phone calls. She gives him whatever papers. And in one shot, I follow him into his office. The desk is on the other end of the stage, and I have him sit into the chair. But as he came in, I panned over to the window, and that's all in one shot. I never did a cut. And then I sit him down at his desk in one shot. He decides to make a call and picks up the phone. The phone is not working. He tries it again. He gets up, and I have him walk right to the middle of the room, and he hears the word cut. And he gets confused. And as he turns to the left, my camera goes to the left over his shoulder, and that's where the window was. There's a crew all in one shot." Now, Richard Matheson himself was really a big fan of what Post had pulled off here. He was particularly thought the reveal and the presentation was impressive because it wasn't specifically described as such in his original script. This is what Matheson had to say. He said, "I love ideas like that. It was a perfect Twilight Zone opening. You revealed exactly what the character's problem was. The schizophrenic problem becomes clear just by a production concept which helped underscore and make that point." And the article goes further to mention how by creating that shot, it took some work, because the office wall had to be built on wheels that had to move silently. So, and then quickly slipped out of the way precisely on cue. So a lot went into just accomplishing a shot like that, which you don't necessarily associate with television series in the 50s and 60s to this extent. Then I watched it, then it kind of grabbed me. I watched it again myself. Then when I did my research online, I read all this, which then made me go watch it one more time and like, yeah, that's really impressive. And, because we're not talking about, Orson Welles and Citizen Kane here. We're talking about a guy, maybe, not a journeyman director, but not a terribly acclaimed one doing a Twilight Zone episode. But that's some really impressive work that maybe many people wouldn't even be aware of how impressive it is. But I just love that we got it all broken down like that.
Yeah, and it's not often that TV directors go to the issue of trying to make a one shot that follows something and goes through that long and requires that choreography. It's pretty impressive. And also the way the camera moves throughout this episode does illustrate at times when he's settling down and at times when he's ramping up. So I think it's really a creative, technical side to this episode.
Right. Now, looking at it further, now I don't know if there's ever been any definite acknowledgement from either the writer or the director of the film, The Truman Show, but there are some that have said over the years that this episode is one of a number of influences and inspirations for that film. I personally question that. I don't think that's actually true, because I think there's something else Twilight Zone related that was probably a much bigger source of inspiration for that mid 90s movie, because there's actually a 1980s episode of the newer version of the Twilight Zone, an episode that was called Secret Service, where a man eventually learns that his life is being secretly videotaped and is in fact a hit cable TV series. That sounds a lot more like the Truman Show to me than this episode did. But there is something about just breaking the plane. It's like it's interesting because it kind of it puts the idea of breaking the fourth wall and putting it on its ear here, because especially because this is a show that already does on occasion break the fourth wall, and also we see the fourth wall is literally, oh, it's the crew and the director, and the discovery is like, wait, my life is not real, it's whatever. It's a really interesting episode. Like I said, the more I think about it, and again, the fact that it's Twilight Zone makes me think about it that many times makes me want to rate it higher than I probably would have initially, because I just kept thinking about it. I was going, wait, is he? I want to believe it's one thing, but I think it's the other thing. I've grown to think it's mental illness. It's not an alternate reality of any kind, whatever. And what we see is, I mean, we don't. Yes, maybe he has kind of gone off with his quote unquote wife and gotten on a plane, but I don't think that's reality though. And I think that the end is, oh, he's dead at the end of this. Oh, by the way, it's one of those funny things where, as now we're in 2025 when we're recording this podcast, hopefully it'll be listened to for years later. And there's been a thing where we see the age of actors or singers or whatever, and we're kind of shocked by, like, me and Brian are roughly the same age, I believe. And we both look remarkably good for our age, because we see pictures of like the Traveling Wilburys when they first got together, and they were younger than us, but they seemed a whole lot older. So I'm watching this and they keep referring to the character as being 36. And I'm like going, okay, he's not 36. And Howard definitely played him. I think he was 47 at times. Like, yeah, because he doesn't look like he's anything more younger than his mid 40s that I'm watching.
No.
So I'll start to round it up all here. The tone of this episode, it's everything. It's dramatic. It's mysterious. It's vaguely unsettling. And it's certainly another episode where the main character is left in the Twilight Zone, and which really leads into tropes, which that one would be one of them. Because, in the Twilight Zone, we do love our businessmen, don't we? Although we often never know just what it is that they do. Although I think whenever in doubt, let's just assume advertising. That's usually what it is in some form or another. But of course, with this episode, we've got Hollywood parading right through because, we're on a movie set, so we've got directors, agents, and techs and so on. So that's yet another trope. We have the question of identity. We have a possible delusion or hallucination. Bringing up even the possibility of an alternate reality and choosing on how as we said from the top, how one interprets the ending. We may or may not have, well, death. Oh, by the way, let's not forget we got suburbia and lots and lots and lots and lots of driving. Oh, they love driving on this show. I will rate the ending now. Now, as I said earlier, the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated the relative ambiguity of it all. Now, it's not exactly a Sopranos-inducing ending here, but did I say Sopranos-inducing? You know what I mean. But it is something different. So I will give the ending a 7. And as far as the episode overall, I'm gonna go just a half a point tick, whatever you want to call it, higher, and I'll slap it with a 7.5. I think that's a good spot for this episode. I will now use Mr. Sterling's closing words to segue over to the next Twilight Zone episode, with a couple of edits to accompany our little podcast here. The first one will be obvious when I say next on the podcast. The culprit is Charles Beaumont, the gentleman responsible for a story unlike any you've ever seen. You talk of immortality, the business of being able to live for as long as one wants. Well, next, you'll see, or really you'll be finding out about, Kevin McCarthy, at the tail end of a life that has gone on for 2,000 years. The play, don't you love when Sterling still refers to them as plays? The play is called Long Live Walter Jameson, and we'll be talking about it next on the podcast. So, Long Live Walter Jameson was directed by Anton Leader, Tony to his friends back in the day. He got to start really directing radio productions, the most well-known being, hey, Suspense. That sounds familiar. In the 50s, he transitioned over to directing television series, although he did snag a producing credit for one feature film, a light comedy called It Happens Every Thursday. But he was able to cover all genres, either be comedies like Get Smart and Gilligan's Island or dramas like Hawaii Five-0 and Ironside. But let's just keep it in a geeky area of interest that we do here in the Twilight Zone. You know what? He did direct the very first and third episode of Lost in Space. That was before the series became far more campy and Dr. Smith-centric. He also directed an episode of Star Trek from its final season, the episode For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. It's not a bad episode, but it's not a great episode. It's, what does the kids say? Mid? It's mid. Finally. However, much to his credit and most of importance to this podcast, he did direct one more episode of Twilight Zone. And it's a very typically well-regarded episode, The Midnight Sun from Season 3. Now, the episode was written by Charles Beaumont, who, as we've said, is the most prolific writer of Twilight Zone episodes other than Rod Serling himself. Now, we did go into great detail about Charles Beaumont's tragically short life when we covered his first Twilight Zone episode, Perchance to Dream. That was back on STVD 433. Suffice to say, one can debate between Beaumont and Matheson as to who was the most impactful writer after Serling. And if you pick Beaumont, it's hard to argue otherwise, especially since he has 22 episodes to his credit, including episodes like Shadow Play and Living Doll. Personally, I pick Matheson. Just my opinion. Beaumont also wrote an episode that will be discussed on I was going to say our next episode, our next podcast, but I'm actually one off there. 2 podcasts from now, we'll be covering another Charles Beaumont episode, and it's one with a fairly well-known and smile-inducing twist. Brian, you might be on that one, or it might be Jamie. We don't know. If and when she returns this podcast, So let's get to the cast of this one, which is blessedly small, so we can get to Brian's coverage sooner than later. The star of this episode, the title role, played by Kevin McCarthy, and I don't mean the former Speaker of the House. Although this Kevin was a distant relation to longtime politician with never realized presidential ambitions, Eugene McCarthy. McCarthy, Kevin that is, was born in Seattle. He lost his parents to the 1918 flu epidemic and was raised by relatives in Minnesota. And it was during his time at the University of Minnesota that he discovered his love for acting when he appeared in his very first play, which was a production of William Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1. As many of our Twilight Zone actors and writers and so on have and did, McCarthy did serve during World War II in the Air Force, in fact. Of course, utilizing his acting skills, McCarthy, during his time in the war, appeared in a number of military training films, and he was later to be a founding member of the Actors Studio, which is pretty damn impressive, quite frankly. Within a few years, McCarthy broke through in a big way. He portrayed Biff Loman in the 1951 film Death of a Salesman. It was a part he had played on the London stage as well. In fact, he was the only actor from that stage production to appear in the film. He got wild notices for it, as well as nominations from both the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards. Now, throughout his career, Kevin McCarthy was a recognizable face on many TV series and the occasional film, but he's probably best known and beloved as the lead actor from the sci-fi classic and a poster which is literally right next to me in the room I'm sitting right now, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Unless I'm mistaken, I believe McCarthy himself has said that other than Body Snatchers, the role that most people have either asked him about or raved about, and certainly what he's received the most fan mail from, wasn't Death of a Salesman or any of his dozens of other acting roles, but it was his role in this episode of The Twilight Zone. I could go a lot further about Mr. McCarthy, but I will stop there and simply say he also died of pneumonia at the age of, well, made it to 96. Keep that number in mind. Next, we have Edgar Stelly as the older and yet still younger collegiate colleague, Professor Sam Kittredge. Born in France back in 1884, spending a few years in Switzerland before hitting the east coast of America, and dying at the age of 89 in Montclair, New York. He did find himself in many radio dramas like Buck Rogers and The Inner Sanctum. And actually, one of his most noteworthy performances on the stage, I believe, was in the original production on Broadway, the Broadway, of Arsenic and Old Lace. He played the Dr. Einstein character opposite Boris Karloff. Now, while Laurie played the part in the classic film, he did get to recreate the part for a TV production in the late 40s for the Ford Theater Hour. Really, in the 50s on, he did mostly TV gigs, but it didn't preclude him from the occasional film role. Did appear in movies like Executive Suite and The Brothers Karamazov. He only had the one appearance on The Twilight Zone, as well as one-time spots in similar series such as One Step Beyond and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I already mentioned that he passed away at the age of 89 in Montclair, New York. Let us then skip over to the part of Jameson's ex or estranged wife, Laurette Bowen, who was played by Estelle Winwood. She was born a year before Mr. Stelly, but she was born in Liverpool, England. She did a lot of stage work throughout in her 20s and 30s. And after a couple little film parts in the 1930s, she didn't really get a career going until she was considerably older. This is a rarity for a woman to really start getting consistent work after she had hit her 50s. Like a few male actors, she seems to be one of those people who is always the little old, well, in this case, little old lady. Kind of like if there's a few guys who seem like they've been old men for their entire careers. So she appeared that way in any number of great TV series like Perry Mason, Batman, and you know what? I'm going to say it again. Bewitched. There he is. But some film roles that I even remembered her from. She had a little part that was quite memorable in the original Producers, as well as one of my personal favorites, a great 70s dark comedy, Murder by Death. She passed away in 1984 at the age of 101. Now, I did point all that out. Did you notice that the grand old ages of the three main actors appearing in this episode, an episode dealing with immortality, they all lived a really long time. Fascinating.
They did. The youngest of the lead actors to die was at 89.
But What should really be noteworthy and notable is what Brian is going to have to say and tell us about this episode. So I'm going to turn the podcast over to Brian to tell us more about Long Live Walter Jameson.
We'll begin with the opening narration. You're looking at Act 1, Scene 1 of A Nightmare, one not restricted to witching hours of dark, rain-swept nights. Professor Walter Jameson, popular beyond words, who talks of the past as if it were the present, who conjures up the dead as if they were alive. A pause then occurs in the narration as a passage from William Tecumseh Sherman is read aloud by William Tecumseh Sherman is read aloud by Professor Walter Jameson. In view of this man, Professor Samuel Kittredge, Walter Jameson has access to knowledge that couldn't come out of a volume of history, but rather from a book on black magic, which is to say that this nightmare begins at noon. Now, the episode begins in a college classroom where we see Walter Jameson, a college professor. We learn that Mr. Jameson is dating a doctoral student named Susanna Kittredge. Susanna's father, Samuel Kittredge, is also a professor at the college with Jameson. He begins to become suspicious of Jameson because Jameson does not appear to age and possesses an unusually vast amount of specific and detailed historical information. Jameson at one point reads from a Civil War diary of Hugh Skelton in his possession. Later, Kittredge spots the diary's author, Major Hugh Skelton's picture in a Civil War photograph and tells Jameson that he looks exactly like Skelton. Jameson tells Kittredge he was granted eternal youth, but no immunity to injury by an alchemist more than 2,000 years ago. He tells Kittredge he has learned the point of death is to make life meaningful, and he keeps a revolver in his desk, but does not have the courage to use it to end his life after nearly 2,000 years. Hearing this, Kittredge refuses permission for Jameson to marry his daughter. The daughter enters the room, and Jameson proposes anyway and suggests to her they immediately elope. Kittredge vows to tell Jameson's secret, but Jameson tells him no one will believe. As he's preparing to leave with Susanna, Jameson is interrupted in his study by a woman named Lorette, who knows him as Tom Bowen, her husband. Lorette tells him she won't let him abandon Susanna as he did her. She grabs Jameson's pistol from his desk and shoots him. Shortly after Bowen leaves, Kittredge runs into the house and in the study finds Jameson bleeding. But Jameson seems to be at peace as he rapidly ages and collapses on the floor. Susanna enters the house, and despite Kittredge trying to stop her, she runs into the room, and where Jameson's suit existed, now only a white powdery substance surrounds it. The closing narration. Last stop on a long journey. As yet another human being returns to the vast nothingness that is the beginning and into the dust that is always the end. That is the end of the episode. Few facts I found interesting about this in doing some research. The gun in Jameson's study was actually an 1862 Colt revolver, which would have been a revolver at the time of the Civil War, which is consistent with Jameson's backstory. Scott covered one of the other points, and that's that all of the actors died of old age in a story about eternal youth. An interesting mini fact or weird fact I found was the main actor, Kevin McCarthy, his actual death date, is the same day as the diary entry he reads aloud in the episode, which is a date we're all familiar with, and that's September 11th. Something else I thought, being a historical person, the history used to view William Tecumseh Sherman harsher than it does now. It was known as Sherman's March to the Sea and Salting the Earth. And, even in this episode, it's sort of hinted at strongly that even the soldiers around Sherman thought he was extreme. And he actually, in some of the old historical things found, has been more revered than history has portrayed him by his troops. And finally, the most interesting technical bit of trivia. This is the only time in any episode in the history of the Twilight Zone that the word Twilight Zone does not appear in the opening or closing narration. So those are my thoughts, Scott, and just my reflection. I enjoyed this because it was a really taut story. It happened quickly. It went fastly. And the turn in it, I thought, was interesting that I'd forgotten since watching it, is that Jameson tells Kittredge sitting in the study that he didn't want his daughter to fall in love with him, and he tried to resign, and Kittredge had respected him so much he asked him to stay, and then he said, what happened? Well, I fell in love with her after trying to keep her away. I thought that was an interesting twist. I don't remember from not seeing this in a long time. So those are sort of my thoughts on it.
Right. In a way, that's the twist that makes him unsympathetic in a way. Whereas you feel like, okay, this is a person who, to whatever extent you want, how everyone wants to phrase it, but it's almost showing like, oh, look, immortality can actually be a curse because anyone in your life that you may care for or love will eventually die, even as you continue to live on. Now, I think when we get to that point in the episode where he says that, you realize it's a difficult situation because in a way, there's something very selfish about it. But but then the flip of it is, well, does that mean if you're going to be immortal, you need to live your life alone and not ever have someone that you care that much about in your life? That's kind of a miserable existence as well. So, but there's something about the edge about the way he says it. And it's kind of like, it's kind of your fault to begin with. If you had, it's like, so he presents that information in a way that comes off a little bit badly. And then when we get the additional information from the woman who turns out to be, a former wife of his, and you realize like, oh, so not only do he eventually leaves them, and maybe he leaves them before they realize, oh, he's not getting any older while they are. And that makes it almost almost a parasitic kind of relationship or something along those lines. And it's that turn is where we were like, okay, someone who seemed like someone that the protagonist of the story, quite frankly. And then it's like, oh no, he's not. He's
Yeah.
he's he's the villain in plain sight. We just didn't view him that way until all of a sudden, yeah, but he kind of is. But he kind of is. It was funny when you mentioned the thing about the opening closing narration. When I was watching the episode, I noticed at the end that it didn't mention it. And I was like, oh, this is one of the episodes that didn't mention it. And it wasn't until I was reading about the episode, I saw what you had brought up, that it's not mentioned at the beginning, the ending, or the beginning. And I went, oh, they didn't mention. And even though I was like, well, I just read it, I was like, oh, let me go listen to how they phrased it. And I went back and like, huh. And I went, Brian's got to mention that. I got to make sure he mentions that. Of
Oh
course.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of, it's kind of shocking that only happened one time. And it does make you wonder why it only happened once. What if it was jarring to people at home?
It could have been. I mean, I'm wondering if it might have been even for people who are becoming fans at that point. Because remember, we're still in the first season of the show, so it's not kind of, I don't know how baked into, everyday life and the national consciousness the show was as of yet. But we have a habit of a different television series that we watch even over the last few years. We'll note something being different or out of the norm. It could be anything from, oh, did you notice how long it took before we got to the opening credits in this episode compared to this episode? Or did you notice they changed something? They changed, the wording of something or the way the narration was, or even they changed how they told us what was previously on the show. They keep changing the word, thank you, the world of Noah Hawley, and things like that. So now it's funny watching this And this is such an iconic show, but it's also from a time, late 50s into the 60s, where you assume they don't really mess around with things like that. That they had a very definite way of opening a show with narration and music and a different close to the show. And there's some things that, depending what version you're watching, whether you're watching via streaming service or you're watching on DVDs or Blu-rays or however you're accessing the Twilight Zone, you may see some that feature Rod Sterling speaking at the end about what's going to be on the next episode, or like if you're watching it via the Paramount Plus version, that does not have that on it. You have to search elsewhere for that, which is too bad because, in my mind, if you're going to be on a streaming service, then there shouldn't be a concern about cutting an extra minute or two out of an episode because you're not doing it to fill a time slot or to accommodate an additional commercial. So I kind of wish that the streaming services like what it's on right now would all just feature the episode in its complete entirety. Even if it's something as macabre as seeing Rod Sterling do a quick commercial for the cigarette that he smoked, which he does at the end of some Twilight Zone episodes, and that literally is the cigarette that might have cost him his life, since he died on the operating table, and it's pretty much due to the fact he was a major, major smoker. Um, Speaking of Rod Sterling, one little fun thing about this, little note about this episode, with especially you got Kevin McCarthy as the star of the episode, and I knew who Kevin McCarthy was. I know more from Invasion of the Body Snatchers and certainly this, but the fact he revealed that he's never met Rod Sterling, never met him, and you'd think Sterling would be on the set at some point because he is, even if he didn't write the episode, he's still kind of the producer of it and probably has a big hand in it. But he was never there. Apparently, he was never there on set, at least not when McCarthy was there. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, but I think our idea of what a showrunner is nowadays is different than what, a creator, a minder does probably now. Like a James Gunn's probably there every day because he's directing and doing it all. But, who knows? But I mean, his face and he brought gravitas to the role. And the final thought I'd have is if you match, this is one of the beautiful bits of writing, and this show does it a lot. The journal entry of how what Sherman does in taking more than he needed and all that is exactly what Jameson has done with these women and the lives he's walked in and out of. And so there is, although Sherman may not have been the monster this guy says, this guy becomes the monster he says Sherman was. And I thought that was really interesting. But there was enough humanity. He wasn't like a gross villain. He was just somebody whose selfishness would continue on as long as he continued to live. So, Scott, that's really all I have. If you've got anything else.
No, I thought it's a very interesting episode because of the way the story unfolds, and we're watching something which seems rather genial and nice, and it's like, oh, here's a little bit of a mystery here, a little odd thing, and then we peel it back, and we're like, oh, okay, and then the further we go, the darker it really is. The only thing I would have wished they could have explored more is the fact that it seemed like I read in places, whatever, and behind the scenes where and maybe he drops a line in it, and I just don't remember. Where supposedly he's actually been around for a couple thousand years. I kind of would have liked maybe just touching on the different lives he had throughout that time, because I seem like we got the Civil War era covered, because he's a picture in that book, whatever, but. Maybe if there was just a few more minutes, we could have picked up like an art book or something, and you see he's like in this this painting from the Middle Ages or something in a fresco. I kind of wanted there to be an opportunity to do that.
There was one hint at it, and that is the bust of Socrates or Plato, and he says he was around at that time, and there's a big clue as well when he says the person that did this to him was an alchemist. And there aren't a lot of alchemists around today. So that, I think that's a clue to cement that time. But I think what I like is the economy of this story in which it tells so much. And another thing that I was struck by watching it, we see a dad trying to protect, his fully grown adult daughter, and this sort of becomes the battle between these two men. And I thought that was interesting, that to see a father standing between, his daughter and this person, the way it was, as being genial colleagues and having some respect. I thought it was really interesting.
Absolutely. So about this episode, like I was saying about the tone of certain things. Again, this is another one of those. We got a twin killing this week. Both episodes were rather serious, mysterious. They kind of fall in that category. Is there a little bit of eeriness to there too? Just because I just like the sound of that word? Sure. Certainly has an eerie ending. Certainly has that. Your various Twilight Zone tropes. Well, we've got teachers and college life. Hey, look, older man, younger woman. They never do that on this show, to say the least. When you get the epitome of an older man and a younger woman, we've got the issues of immortality, a character or a person from another time, another era. And, if you can have immortality, then by golly, you're also going to have death. Now, rating the ending. Now, I got to be honest here. I don't know if I ever really loved the ending of this episode. I guess it's because I feel like I can think of other ways to complete the tale that just might have been a bit more, I don't know if it would have just been more shocking or unsettling or creepy or satisfying or what have you. I mean, look, the aging itself is done in an interesting manner. And I think we probably both read about how they did it. And it's just might be a bit too much to try to describe on the podcast. But, I like that they kind of did it, in camera or whatever. But I can't say I really loved it very much. I'm hard pressed to really go higher than a 6 for the ending of this episode. It's just kind of the way I feel about it. Now, rating the episode overall, I will be more generous there. I will go a full point higher than that, and I will give it a 7 for the overall episode. Okay, so as we sweep away the ashes of what was once Walter Jameson, we dust off another completed journey through the land of surreal imagination as we find our way back to the real world. Now, Brian, I want to thank you so much for joining us once again. Thanks, Brian.
I had a really good time. Enjoyed watching this episode, studying about it, and as always, I'm happy to talk about this stuff.
Excellent. Now, as for you, our both new and loyal listeners alike, the Twilight Zone edition of this podcast will return in the next 2+ weeks with our comprehensive coverage of 2 more Twilight Zone classics. People Are Alike All Over with Roddy McDowell, and Execution, starring Russell Johnson, who may be best remembered as the professor from Gilligan's Island. Those are the 25th and 26th episodes from the first season of The Twilight Zone, and whether you think them iconic or obscure, they're worth watching and even more worthy of listening to this podcast discuss them. So I hope you will all join us then. Thank you, and good night.
Good night.